Hello and welcome back, future scientists. I'm Mr. K with Mississippi Public Broadcasting, and I have another great lesson ready for us today. So we're moving on to a whole new unit, okay? Our topic today is cellular energy. So we're leaving all that other stuff behind, and we're gonna kind of change it up today, okay? So without any further ado, let's go ahead and get the ball rolling and seeing what we're talking about today. So here are our major concepts. Here's what we're really trying to answer throughout this unit. Okay, the first thing we want to understand is how to comprehend the sources of an organism's energy. Okay, we also want to be able to explain how cells store and release energy in the form of ATP. So we're going to talk about ATP a lot today, okay? And then the last thing, we're going to outline the methods by which cells acquire energy. So we're really talking about cells, how they get the energy they need to survive, where is that coming from, and what do they do with it, okay? So over this unit, those are the questions that we're going to try to answer. So let's go ahead and hop into it, okay? Today we're talking about energy in just more of a broad sense. We're not going to really get into the cellular level too much, just kind of talk about it more as an overall unit, okay? So energy, what's going on here? Okay, well, I wanted to introduce two terms that are going to be very important in this unit, and these are words that you've probably heard of before. So we have the words heterotroph and autotrophs, and this really all comes down to how that organism is obtaining its food or its energy, okay? Let's focus on the prefixes of these words. So first of all, the suffix of both of these words, troph, T-R-O-P-H, I know that that means food, and so these are both talking about how these organisms get their food. Hetero, as in heterotroph, means different, so they have to get their food from somewhere else other than themselves. And then auto, think of like an automatic car. An automatic car is a car that shifts gears for you. In the same way, autotrophs don't have to eat food, they make their own food. So auto means self. So heterotrophs have to eat a different organism to get energy. Autotrophs make the food themselves. So other words that are kind of similar to this, autotroph, you might have seen something called a producer. So a producer and an autotroph are the same thing. They're both making their own food. And a heterotroph and a consumer are the same thing, okay? They're both having to eat another organism to obtain energy. Okay, so that's just kind of a breakdown. You can see that first bullet point kind of gives you the definition of a heterotroph. They must obtain their nutrients by consuming other living organisms. And again, hetero means other or different. Okay, that second bullet point, this says organisms are capable of producing their own food, and so we would call those autotrophs. Okay, autotrophs or producers. These are things like plants and algae, certain bacteria. If they can make their own food, they're called an autotroph. Okay, and then lastly, photosynthesis is the process by which sunlight is harnessed to produce high energy carbohydrates. So we're going to talk about photosynthesis a lot. It's how plants and some of those other organisms make their food. They use the energy in sunlight, they use water, carbon dioxide, they mix it up and they make glucose out of it. Okay, so we're going to talk about photosynthesis a lot this unit. So why is photosynthesis so important? Well, if you think about it, okay, photosynthesis is really the starting point of all food chains, okay? All the energy from on the earth as far as our food ultimately comes from the sun if you go back far enough. Okay, so photosynthesis starts every single food chain. All food chains start off with a producer. Something's eating that plant or the grass or that bacteria, okay? Photosynthesis is really important because it can convert inorganic materials such as carbon dioxide and water into organic molecules like glucose. So it can take something that is not considered alive and turn it into something that is considered alive. Lastly, photosynthesis is also going to produce oxygen, and oxygen is the gas that we breathe. Animals need oxygen in order to live, so it's super important for us. It's where our food comes from, it's where our air comes from. You couldn't live without either one of those things, so photosynthesis is very, very important. Okay, let's break down this word photosynthesis in a little bit of detail, okay? So photosynthesis, what do I see there? Well, that prefix photo, you might be thinking of like a photograph, right? Well, photo in this sense means light, and synthesis means to create. So we're making something using light. Well, what are we making here? Well, plants will use sunlight to transform water and carbon dioxide into glucose, which is a type of sugar, okay? Plants use glucose as both as an energy source and as a building block for growth. Okay, so plants are making all of this glucose. They're going to use that glucose in order to survive off of it, but they also build their body out of it. We talked about cellulose as that really important sugar that plants use to build their bodies up, okay? And then lastly, this is how autotrophs are going to produce glucose. And we kind of talked about this just a second ago. All food chains start with an autotroph. So the autotrophs make glucose, and then heterotrophs are going to consume that plant. And that's kind of where our food's coming from, okay? So let's keep it going. So just a quick summary of energy and this thing called ATP and what cells are doing. So all cells require energy. We know that, right? Cells are moving around, they're growing, they're producing new organelles. They need energy to do all that type of thing. Cells only use a certain type of energy though, okay? ATP is the form of energy used by cells for all life processes. So ATP is this molecule, it's called adenosine triphosphate. It's basically just a molecule with 3 phosphates on it, and if you break one of those phosphates off, it produces a little bit of energy, okay? You can kind of think of it like a battery or something, okay? But that's the energy that cells like to use. So all of our food, all of the glucose and sugar that we eat has to be converted into ATP so that your cells can use it in order to do all of these things that they have to do, okay? So cells produce ATP by breaking down glucose, a type of sugar. So the plant makes the glucose, we consume the glucose, our body turns it into ATP, and then we can use it for our own purposes, okay? Glucose provides the energy for the body, while ATP supplies energy for the cell. So that's kind of how you can think of it as on an organism level, as an individual human or person, you need glucose, but each of your cells inside of your body, they really need ATP. So we're taking ATP, we're going to break it down, we're going to take glucose, break it down into ATP, and then your cells are going to be able to use it for all of its life processes, okay? So that brings us to something really important called cellular respiration. So how do we take glucose that's in a plant and turn it into ATP that your cells can use? We do that through a process called cellular respiration, okay? And I really want to draw your attention to one of the words here. So look at that second word, respiration. If I asked you to respire, or if I asked you to respirate, what am I asking you to do? I'm asking you to breathe, right? To respire means to breathe. There's a very important gas in this process that we need in order to get the most ATP out of our food. What gas do we breathe in all day that's so important for animals? It's oxygen, right? So oxygen is very important. We're going to use that oxygen in the air. The cells, it's going to get into the cells. The cells are going to respire. They're going to use that oxygen, and they're going to be able to break down that glucose into that ATP. And we'll be talking about cellular respiration in a good bit of detail over the next couple days, okay? So how does this glucose get into your body? Well, I kind of just was talking about this, right? The plants make the glucose, and then your body turns the glucose into ATP. How does that happen? Well, here are some steps that goes through this whole process, right? So first of all, the glucose is coming from the food that you consume, right? So imagine you're eating a piece of bread or pasta or rice. Inside of those food that you eat, there's a lot of carbohydrates. Okay, so we're going to take those carbohydrates. These are large carbohydrates called starches. Your body's going to break those large carbohydrates down into small sugars that we can use to digest further. Okay, so you got the starches. We're breaking them down into more simple sugars. Okay, this whole process of digesting starches and sugars, that actually starts in the mouth. There's an enzyme called salivary amylase, and your mouth is going to start to digest those starches. Okay, so we're trying to break those big macromolecules down into something smaller that we can use. Okay, so then once you've consumed it and your body starts to break it down, we've taken the big sugars and broken them into smaller sugars. What happens then? Well, the carbohydrates will eventually reach the large intestines. When they're broken down into small enough particles, they are able to be absorbed directly into the blood. Okay, these small sugars at this point, once we've broken the starches down into smaller sugars, we would call these monosaccharides, and that might sound familiar from our units in the past. Okay, then those monosaccharides, glucose is one example of a monosaccharide, that your red blood cells are going to transport those sugars to the cells that need them. So you've eaten them, you've broken them down, they get into the blood transports them to the cells that need these sugars. Okay, what happens then? Well, you might remember this is just kind of all of a review of some stuff that we've been talking about over the past few units. So once the red blood cells deliver the glucose to the cell, now we have to worry about getting past the cell membrane. Okay, the sugars are too large to pass through this phospholipid bilayer. So what happens is that there'll be a protein channel. This little blue oval here is like a protein channel. It's a door. It's large enough for the glucose molecule to enter in through. So that's how the glucose is going to get into the cell, is that it moves through one of these channel proteins. Okay, once it's into the cell, then we have to get that sugar to the mitochondria. So there's a lot of steps that have to happen for your body to really take advantage of this sugar. So what's happening in the mitochondria? Well, remember that the mitochondria is an organelle. They're inside of all of your cells. We're going to take that glucose and break it down even further. Here's kind of a step-by-step process of what's going on. Okay, there's going to be CO2 that's going to be released from this cellular respiration. That's going to be the carbon dioxide that you exhale. Okay, this process requires food, oxygen, and water, and all of your trillions of cells perform this function. Okay, each cell may contain hundreds of mitochondria, all generating ATP. So this is kind of the process that has to happen just for the sugar to get to the mitochondria where it can really be utilized to make ATP. So there's a lot of steps just to get it there, and then once the glucose is actually at the mitochondria, at this organelle, the cellular respiration process can be pretty lengthy as well. So let's see what's going on after that. Okay, so why are we doing all of this? I talked about how the glucose, you got to eat it, you got to digest it, it has to get into the blood. Why are we doing all of these steps? Well, remember that the energy that you need is coming from the food that you're eating. But first we have to turn it into ATP. So that's why we're doing all of these steps. A word that you might be familiar with is a calorie. When people are watching their weight or trying to gain or lose weight, they're really counting calories. Okay, what is a calorie? It's the amount of energy in food. It's equal to the amount of energy needed to raise 1 gram of water by 1 degree Celsius. 1 calorie produces about 9,000 ATP. So that gives you an idea of how much energy you're getting out of your food. The food you consume is used to replenish ATP, which is lost as heat, waste, or stored for future use. Okay? So last little thing here, we're wrapping up. Y'all hang in there with me. What is energy anyway? Well, this takes us back to this guy named Isaac Newton. He had these 3 laws of thermodynamics. Okay, what is energy? Well, energy is just the ability to do work. Okay, what does that mean? One of his laws in thermodynamics tells us that energy cannot be created or destroyed. It can only be transferred from one form to another. Once a cell has used energy to perform work, that energy cannot be reused again by the organism. So one question you might see coming up over this unit is kind of referring to that last bullet point there. It says once a cell has used energy to perform work, that energy cannot be reused again by an organism. So matter gets recycled. Matter is like the physical stuff that makes up your body. Matter gets recycled in the environment, in the world, but energy doesn't really get recycled. Once the energy is used, you can't really get it back, okay? It can't be created or destroyed, but it's harder to get to than like recycling that matter, okay? So great work on that, y'all. Thank you so much for hanging in there with me. Your teacher has some other work for you to give it your best effort on. Make sure you're kind of figuring this stuff out, and I hope everybody has a great day.